Hello and welcome to episode 1 of the Meme Checker podcast on memechecker.net. I'm your host Keelan Balderson, and today I'm joined by...
Sam Brooks. Hello, ready to check some memes.
How's it going, Sam?
It's going pretty good. I've been reading a lot of headlines lately, getting some prep in. I'm really excited to talk about some things that may or may not be true.
Back into the swing of things after London?
Oh yes, wonderful time, but then we're sort of back to the same old rigmarole.
Yeah, it's always fun to go to the big city, but personally I find it a bit tiring, but there you go.
Yeah, too full of weirdos, I think.
And people who think that you've got coronavirus ignoring you.
Exactly.
So in this debut episode, we're going to be talking about 17-year-old Greta Thunberg, or Greta Thunberg. There's different pronunciations of that name. We're definitely butchering the Swedish version anyway, but everyone knows who we're talking about. She has become the proverbial and quite literal poster child of the climate change activist movement. She leads marches, she gives speeches at the UN, school children seem to be taking days off school, which has caused a little bit of controversy. So we'll be getting to all that. Now, for those that don't know, we actually piloted this podcast, or at least the concept of this podcast a few years back under the name Meme Tective. Got any memories of that?
Oh, believe me, the memories I have of that experience just never seem to go away. They never seem to leave me.
Well, I've changed the name Meme Tective to Meme Checker. I think that's probably a bit more search engine friendly. I was never quite sure whether Meme Tective sounded the way I was hoping it was going to sound.
Nah, people just aren't ready for portmanteaus, man. You gotta get the two words that are totally correct.
And hopefully this time we don't attract any crazy people that think Jews run the world, or
the usual suspects that still follow me to this day.
And we weren't even doing a particularly controversial episode. It wasn't about the war, or...
No, it was literally a throwaway comment that people seem to have attached themselves to. Let's hope that doesn't happen again.
Yeah, well, I mean, I say we're not touching on controversial subjects, but maybe we are. We are talking about Greta Thunberg, or in Swedish, I think it's pronounced Thunberg, actually, I don't know, but we'll be talking about one of the memes that has been shared quite widely about her, and just use that as of a kicking off point to tell people what we're doing here on the podcast and what we're doing on the site. memechecker.net aims to fill the void left behind by fact-checking services that focus on fake news by focusing on the legitimacy of memes, because, you know, in my opinion, as much as people get their kind of opinions and worldviews from the news, in this modern age, memes spread arguably further a lot of the time than news does. So I thought it might be worth sort of focusing solely on memes, usually memes to do with politics and important issues. I might branch off into some of the more comical things, but that's kind of where I am with that. I don't know if you've checked out the site yet or not.
I have. It seems to be a pretty good... it's a nice break from the usual sort of like, oh, we're the real source, we know about everything that's happening. Like, it's a nice thing to see. Yeah,
and I mean, we don't claim to be the ultimate authority on a meme's like authenticity. The idea really here is to just bring it to people's attention. In the post that I do, I will link to the sources that I've used to come to the conclusions that I've come to, and then hopefully the public can sort of make up their own mind. As far as the podcast goes, the idea is to take a meme that we've already explored on the website and use that as a jumping off point for discussion here on the podcast. But so yeah, let's jump right into it. When was the first time that you sort of heard the name Greta Thunberg?
Well, as most people get their news nowadays, Twitter was actually probably the first place that I ever heard about this lady. Mostly people sort of like I think it was a trending topic at the time, but there were people just sort of weighing in with their own opinions about who she is and what she stands for, because we all know the topic of climate change is very controversial. There's a lot of naysayers, there's a lot of people that vehemently believe this, and it stems back like many, many years. I think An Inconvenient Truth was probably the big, like, stepping stone for it to be brought to, like, public attention, and it's not really stopped, being talked about since. So I think Greta Thunberg is probably going to be the next sort of, like, big name that campaigns for this kind of thing among the next generation, I'd say.
She's picking up the baton from Al Gore.
Exactly, and what a person to do it.
Right, yeah. I mean, yeah, going back to that Inconvenient Truth, I think as much as that brought climate change to the forefront, some of the wilder things that were in that film also fed into the opposite side of the debate, and I think that's probably still being felt today, where there are still two sides of people, some who are absolutely convinced that climate change is a hoax, and Al Gore just made this all up to somehow, make money off carbon taxes or something. I mean, perhaps there's a slither of truth to that. There's always going to be people there where money is to be made. But yeah, the debate is still kind of raging on, if you want to call it a debate. I first heard about Greta, really, I think she did that big UN speech, oh, you've taken my dreams, and that obviously became sort of a memeable phrase that spread everywhere. And just the hate that I saw on my Facebook feeds and Twitter feeds. I mean, I think I'm actually surrounded by a greater number of strange people than you perhaps are. But I think a lot but I think a lot of people did sort of see a sort of surge in memes and things about her around that time when she got to speak at the UN. People just tearing her to shreds, really.
Well, there's always those people that will detract anyone with an opposite point of view. I feel like we live in a world where facts are no longer really the championing point of an argument anymore. People always take facts and either say, oh, that must be true, or they'll say, no, it's lies and propaganda made up by the other guys to try and sway the world into a certain direction that I don't agree with. So really, facts can either be solid evidence for one group of people, or they can just be seen as, ridiculous, like, weird sheep mind, like, sort of sending people in a different direction where they shouldn't be going. And it's all down to personal opinion now. There's never really one, like, story. Like you say, there's always two sides to every coin. It's just figuring out which side sort of is more in line with your own views and whether that is good for the people in your life around you.
Yeah, everyone sort of has their own echo chamber that they cling to, and if something sounds reasonable to them, then they just go, well, that's my facts, and someone else will have a completely... Yeah, like on Twitter, literally, there are different groups of people that literally live in different realities to each
Precisely.
other.
With politics being the way that they are today, you have the left and you have the right. There's not really a middle ground anymore. I put myself on the left personally, and I can already hear the outcries of everyone on the right, and yet nobody knows what my exact opinions about anything are. It's just saying that you identify with one cause. It can already lead people to think a certain way about you without knowing all of the specifics. It's very black and white when really it should be more of a grey area across the board.
Yeah, it's the term the post-truth era is... I'm not sure where that term came from, but it is kind of relevant to the era that we're living in now. And you hear Donald Trump back in when he was getting elected talking about alternative facts. Yeah, there are pretty much alternative facts to any one event that takes place. And I'm a sort of natural contrarian to what you might see on the mainstream news. I built a whole brand on alternative news at one point. But my opinions on different topics fall all over the place. But once you get on Twitter and say one thing, you get boxed one way, and it's a bit of a bleak kind of situation at the moment. I'm a bit disillusioned with a lot of things, but hopefully we can add to that whole noise with the podcast, and
yeah, exactly. We can make you disillusioned just like us.
and we'll see what reactions we get.
Precisely.
So let's get down to the meme in question. Basically, the meme put forth is, does Greta Thunberg have fetal alcohol syndrome? Did you see this?
Quite the question.
Did you see this before I sent you it? Because I know it popped up on my timeline quite a lot. I don't know how wide it is in terms of your social media circle.
Well, honestly, the first time I saw it was when you sent it to me. As you say, we roll in different circles. I'm sort of more in a... I'm not really into the whole political, world news sort of circle. Granted, I try and pay attention when I can, but it's not really what I make my social media experience about. So, the first time I ever saw it was when you sent it to me. And, boy, it just opened up a can of worms for me.
Yeah, I like to be on the periphery of everything that's a little bit weird online. I like to poke the bear, and every so often I'll get into it, regret that I did, go away for a few months, and then repeat the cycle. I don't know, maybe I've got bipolar or something. But yeah, for people that don't know what fetal alcohol syndrome is, as per the NHS, which probably the most authoritative source I could find right now about it.
Exactly.
Basically, if you drink alcohol during pregnancy, you risk causing harm to the baby. We all know that. And sometimes this can result in mental and physical problems for the baby. And this falls under a spectrum of sort of disorders called fetal alcohol syndrome. This can result in a head that's smaller than the average person. It can result in poor overall growth. They may be smaller on average at birth, and it may take several years to sort of catch up. And they're usually shorter than the average adult. But the thing that these meme makers have jumped on is that it also causes these distinctive facial features. So you can get smaller eyes, a thin upper lip. There's supposedly this smooth area between the nose and the upper lip, upturned nose, all this kind of stuff. Okay, and that's really what these meme makers have jumped on. And in a nutshell, this meme has essentially become just this sick way of mocking what this teenage girl looks like. You know, you're mocking a teenage girl's physical appearance. They sort of take this crude diagram of a baby supposedly with fetal alcohol syndrome. They place Greta's picture next to it, and then everybody piles on saying, look, there's this mentally ill child. She's got this disease. The left are pushing her out to push this propaganda. And it's just a very weird, thing to occur, really, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people come under scrutiny for their appearance, sort of, no matter what they look like. You could be viewed as one of the most attractive people, by society at large. You'll always have that base of people saying, oh, their eyes are too close together, or their nose is a bit weird. And, you can say, yeah, she might share a couple of physical traits that are in line with a certain syndrome, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the syndrome is present. I mean, it could be the case of anything else, not to bring it in out of left field here, but if coronavirus, a lot of the symptoms are the same as the common cold. For example, I've recently gone under a spell of a common cold, got over it fine. Yet the amount of people that were asking me if I had coronavirus, it was through the roof. Every person that I met was like, oh, have you been to China? I'm like, no. Just I share the symptoms.
Well, what we really want to know is how much toilet roll have you purchased?
Every single one I could lay my eyes on. No one will get it because I have it now. But that's what I mean. A lot of people can share traits or not even disabilities that are in line with a certain syndrome. That doesn't necessarily mean that they have the syndrome. And you can stretch reality to a point where you can see someone as having these features, but in reality, they might not even have them at all. You're just kind of playing yourself into that mindset that they do have it to try and prove a point. And I'm not even sure what the point is. If she did have fetal alcohol syndrome, does that somehow nullify her viewpoints or make her seem like a joke to people. It's very confusing as to what the goal here is, other than mocking a teenage girl based on her appearances, which is a very shallow way of saying, I don't agree with what this person is saying, let's point and laugh at them.
And, like, just to be clear, no doctor has come out and said she has fetal alcohol syndrome. She's never said that she's got fetal alcohol syndrome. And she's actually been quite open about some of the conditions that she does have. She says she is on the Asperger's spectrum, and she considers that a positive thing. She called it her superpower. And, you know, when you look at her, she's traveling the world, she's meeting all sorts of people, she's giving articulate speeches and things like that. It clearly is not affecting her in a negative way. And a lot of the symptoms of fetal alcohol syndrome include cognitive impairment. It can give you sort of dyspraxia type symptoms where you're not sort of steady on your feet, you're clumsy, that kind of thing. There's all these other symptoms associated with fetal alcohol syndrome that she clearly doesn't have, because she's sitting in the UN able to converse with some of the world's, you know, most intimidating leaders. So she's
Exactly.
clearly not impaired in any way.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the symptoms can be a grand pick and mix of various things, like, oh, she has this, she has that, therefore she must have all of the things that relate to this syndrome. Whereas actually, no, you're just kind of playing yourself here by saying, oh, she must have some form of disability, she's saying things that I disagree with.
And if you just look at it logically, I'm a boring person, I get obsessed with things, so I do topics to death and then I go on to the next topic. But she put a picture of Greta instead of against these stupid, like, amateur diagrams, put Greta against a photo of her father, and then you realise, oh, she looks like her dad, because that's her dad, and that's their genetics.
Genetics are a funny lark, aren't they? Sometimes you look exactly like your parents, other times people think you have fetal alcohol syndrome.
It's just, that's what the Thunbergs look like. So, sorry, she doesn't have fetal alcohol syndrome. And actually, the US-based National Organization on Fetal Alcohol Syndrome came out with a statement, you know, kind of debunking this. They called it blatantly insulting, outrageously ignorant, and deeply offensive. And they say, unfortunately, some people in society use fetal alcohol syndrome as a derogatory insult. This does great harm and perpetuates the stigma surrounding the disorder, when children and adults affected by it deserve our understanding and support. So, you know, like, it's one thing to mock Greta because she may or may not, and I personally think not, look like some of these symptoms, but you're also now taking the piss, taking the mick out of a whole group of people that do have a disorder and don't deserve to be mocked.
Exactly, but that's sort of like the whole modus operandi of people sort of in that political spectrum. Not to, you know, paint it with one brush or anything, but they always attack people based on anything but their beliefs. They sort of use anything else about that person, like their personal life, how they look, what they do, who they talk to try and bring down the argument that they're trying to bring forth to the table.
Yeah, it's just dirty political tactics. It's ad hominem attacks. It's attack the character, attack the person, make them seem weak, and maybe I don't really know what they get out of it, because I mean, this doesn't really put anyone who does this in a good light, but that's just the way dirty politics are played. I do have a Fox News clip that I'm going to splice in probably about now, because the whole Asperger's thing and this fetal alcohol syndrome thing has sort of birthed this narrative that I see repeated a lot online, that she's a mentally ill person who is being exploited, and I'll I'll play that clip now.
None of that matters because the climate hysteria movement is not about science. If it were about science, it would be led by scientists rather than by politicians and a mentally ill Swedish child who is being exploited by her parents and by the international left. So what you're seeing here is a political movement and a religious movement, and it's fulfilling religious and political goals of the left, but it isn't doing very much for science.
Chris, you had a visceral reaction to that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you're a grown man and you're attacking a child. Shame on you. She's trying to do what she thinks is right. And by the way, now, relax, skinny boy. I got this, okay? You're attacking a child. You're a grown man. Have some cool.
I'm not. I'm attacking the left for exploiting a mentally ill child.
Maybe on your podcast, you get away and say whatever you want because nobody's listening. You're on national television. Be a grown-up when you're talking about children. She's trying to save the planet because your president doesn't believe in climate change, and kids need to take to the streets to worry about their future. You are despicable for talking to her about her like that, and you should apologize on national television right now.
I think the international left and her parents who are exploiting a girl with many mental illnesses.
You called her mentally ill. Take it back now.
She is mentally ill. She is mentally ill. She has autism. She has obsessive compulsive disorder. She has selective mutism. She had depression.
You are despicable.
Her mother wrote about
It's just a way for these people to shut down debate. They don't want to debate on the science. They would rather just brush this away by saying either A, in like an overtly nasty way, that she's mentally ill, so why would we listen to essentially a crazy person, or they flip it around and say, oh, the left wing are being really evil by forcing this young mentally ill girl out there to be the poster child. All the clips I've seen and everything I've read, she doesn't seem like she's being forced to do this or is being exploited in any way. She seems quite happy to be doing this. And let's not forget, 16, 17 is not a young child. You have your own opinions at that age. You know what you're feeling. A couple of years after that, I was out protesting and being an activist and doing things. So I don't buy that either. I genuinely think that this is what she believes, and she's gone out and done that, and good for her, I guess, whether you agree with her or not.
Yeah, exactly. It's a tactic that has been used many years before and will continue to be used in the future. And it mocks everyone else at the point where it's like, okay, but what is the point of this? You're not actually adding to the conversation. You're just making yourself seem like a narrow-minded moron that doesn't believe, like, for the good of the people, that things are bad and that things need changing, which is what she's championing, which I think is a valid thing. That, okay, you can believe in climate change or you cannot believe in climate change, but what really matters is the progress of our future, and it's something that she seems to care about, which is something that I can get behind personally.
And of course, the meme in question, we don't necessarily, and I'm not even sure, I'm not sure it was ever meant to be taken literally. It comes from this sort of trolling part of the internet. I think the whole point was to undermine her in a nasty way, not in a genuine way. And part of the methodology for memechecker.net, I do reverse image searches. So if I find a meme that I think's interesting or worth tackling, first I'll use Google reverse image search. There's various ways to sort of narrow that down. Then there's this specialized image search engine called TinEye that will literally locate the very first time an image, whether it's an image that's been spliced together, or find both versions of the original image. You can go back and pretty accurately discover where these things began. And in this case, the Greta Thunberg fetal alcohol syndrome meme originated in March 2019 on a site called Eurochan, which, by the name you can probably guess, is a clone of the infamous 4chan. But eventually ended up on 4chan itself as well, and kind of spread from there. I don't know if you have any thoughts on 4chan.
Well, it's always been the breeding ground of political memes, political messages, I don't want to say that it's mostly right-leaning, but everything that I've seen come from 4chan has lent into the right. Obviously, with the Donald Trump Pepe memes, that was sort of fostered on the Chan websites as a whole, and everything like that. You never hear sort of anything else in another political spectrum as coming from those particular boards, which is interesting to me because surely the amount of users that visit those boards, there must be some, like even a small subset, a singular board even, that shares a different mindset than most of the other boards. And yet no, you always hear about the same sort of political leanings coming from these places. It just sort of makes you think, well, is it really a place that can repeatedly be seen as legitimate or even trusted, or are you even surprised that these sort of tactics come from these websites anymore?
Yeah, it's a very strange place, and they have a very strange relationship with the mainstream media. It's, one of them main purposes, I think, above all else, even above political things as such, is trolling. They like to seed things into the wider social media sphere, and they love it. They get off on it when then that ends up becoming a mainstream news story, because by the time it gets to the mainstream news, whatever the thing they were doing is often misunderstood, misrepresented, and they're laughing about it because they kicked off all this drama. Often it's just for kicks. Sometimes there are sort of political reasons behind what they do. I don't know if you've heard of the whole OK hand symbol controversy.
Yes, it was a meme that was fostered on the website. I believe it was intended as a way to trick sort of Twitter
Right.
and the left side of media, where the OK symbol, as you would often make a circle with your thumb and your index finger and then point your three other fingers upward, as to like give an affirmative gesture, like an OK, very good. However, on the site of 4chan, people would pretend that it was a symbol of white power, indicated by the three fingers pointing up as being the W, and then the circle that you make with your index and thumb and the rest of your arm being the P, WP, white power, which was then fed into the mainstream media, and so now people can often associate it as being like, oh, the alt-right and all of the Nazis use that symbol as a white power gesture, when in fact, they never even did that in the first place. It was just a lie concocted by 4chan to sort of sow seeds of distrust and cause more upset amongst people. And now, ironically, some members of the alt-right and the Nazis have started using that as a white power symbol because they saw it on 4chan.
Yeah, it's very bizarre. There's layers and layers to how all this works. It's like art imitating life, imitating art, imitating life. And now no one knows who really thinks what or what people's aims really are, and then Christchurch gets shot down by a crazy person who live streams it.
Exactly that, yes.
It's like, what's happening? It's very bizarre, and it would take 50 episodes to really dig down into that. But yeah, this is just one of those memes. This Greta meme is just one of those memes that started there, maybe as a joke, maybe it had political agenda behind it as well. I know it picked up a lot of steam after the infamous Milo Yiannopoulos shared the meme. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's sort of like this right-wing figure. He used to get a lot of mainstream media play. He got a few sort of chat shows where he argued the anti-feminist side of things. He covered Gamergate in a more sympathetic way to the gamers, as opposed to the mainstream media that were kind of the opposite of that. He's one of these sort of right-wing free speech absolutists that will deliberately troll and often say offensive things just for the sake of making a point about free speech. And he'd be there at all the sort of college campus, no platforming, protesty kind of stuff that went on and still does go on. And he shared that. Again, most likely he was just trolling. He was just joking. But I think there is a political element to it, because a lot of people that hang in those circles are climate change skeptics too. So it sort of has two functions. One, it's a cruel joke, but two, it plays into the nastier elements of the climate change skeptic community.
Well, exactly, and what you got to remember, when you're in a position of such, I don't want to say power, but when you're in a position of such notoriety, people are going to take what you share and what you say to a certain degree of seriousness, and you can't just brush it under the rug and mean like, oh, it was only a joke, I was just kidding, when the basis of your platform there is anything but that. You're trying to spread political viewpoints as sort of like a serious message to try and counteract what other people are saying. So for them to just share images and be like, oh, can't you tell? It was just me being funny. That's such a weak defense, and it doesn't contribute to any sort of discussion. It's those kinds of people, like the people that go to the schools and just try and rile up the students, which are assumedly predominantly on the left side, to just create like TikToks and GIFs and Reddit posts about, oh, this liberal was shut down by this genius over here, where in fact it doesn't give the world any sort of useful information or knowledge that can be used to progress things.
Yeah, and like, full disclosure, I'm personally somewhat skeptical of climate change. There's been a few things that have concerned me over the years. There was the whole Climate Gate scandal, where perhaps there may have been some manipulation in scientific data. Some of the actions of some activists I'm not too comfortable with. Sometimes I think it's hypocritical. Sometimes I wonder what their aim really is. There's the old carbon tax system that was tried to be pushed through, and I wasn't too comfortable with things like that. But I think, yeah, in general, I mean, humans obviously have an impact on the climate. Everything has an impact on the climate. That's sort of just how ecosystems work, you know? So I do think maybe there's an alarmist element to the climate change movement, and that maybe we could put efforts into adapting to the changes in climate rather than maybe trying to prevent the changes that are occurring. I think maybe the cat's already out the bag, and maybe we just need to learn to live with it and adapt in different ways. I also feel uneasy when I hear about things like global agreements and global laws. There's a certain privilege when you get like the wealthy nations of the West, who have already polluted the world for God knows how many years, who have already industrialized, trying to tell impoverished nations, trying to come to agreements with these impoverished nations, telling them, oh, how dare you use that coal power plant, when, you know, their whole populations can barely eat and they barely have an economy. It's like, no, like, think about, I don't know, what's the game? Age of Empires, where you start at like the Bronze Age or something, and then you end up whatever. The Green Age is over here. Some of these countries are down here. You can't stifle their growth to protect the planet when we've already sort of had the privilege of abusing the planet before they did. So there's all sorts of little grey areas and things that I sort of am skeptical about. But that doesn't mean I post a meme about a 16-year-old girl and take the mick about how she looks. So
well, exactly. Like, it harkens back to what I was saying earlier, is that things shouldn't be black and they shouldn't be white. There should be a grey in the middle where you can explore all of these different ideas. Like, myself, to a degree, I believe that climate change has happened and is continuing to happen. Like, you don't even need scientific data to prove it. You can just look outside. You can clearly see, like, many, many decades ago, the time where snow would arrive, sort of in your local area. It's now shifted by at least 2 months. Like, I don't know if you remember ever getting snow around December time.
Yeah, it's definitely changed. Like,
and now we get snow sort of in the February or March times. Not so far this year, but last year in particular, we had heavy snowfall in the middle of February.
Yeah, what was it? A couple of years ago, we had the beast from the east, and I was walking home from uni, and I was getting to the point where I thought, if I tripped over now, I'm dead. I'm just going to be buried under this.
Exactly. Yes, and yeah, scientific data can be falsified, but I like to believe for the most part that it isn't, except when it is obviously proof that it is. In which case, fine, you have a case to stand on. But it's more of a thing that, like, yeah, you make a great point with the whole. The West has been ruining, like, the world's thing for years, and it's kind of too late to sort of change the way that it's happening. It's more sort of a case of ensuring that for future generations they at least get a fair shake of sort of sorting out how they can adapt, how they can change things, how they can make sure that, you know, life still goes on to a quality which is agreeable with what we've been doing in life so far.
Yeah, and I think one of the problems, just kind of off to a side really, but it was branded as global warming for so long that they've kind of got stuck in this idea that means everywhere on the planet has to be slowly rising in temperature, else global warming isn't happening. No, it also causes extremes in different types of weather systems. You know, that means more tornadoes. That means random storms and floodings, and the way the system works. It's not like everyone wakes up with the same season in the same part of the world and, it's a bit warmer today. It has a knock-on effect in all different types of ecosystems. So changing it to climate change was a much better branding tactic, if that's what you want to call it, than global warming.
Yeah, the rebrand has definitely done it a lot more favors because it more accurately describes sort of the symptoms that we're getting, which is extreme weather conditions at different times around the world that are damaging to the populace that live in those areas.
Yeah, and I've also heard it described as global weirding, which is a bit of a funny way to put it, but it's true. Yeah, weird things be happening, folks.
Right, exactly. It's more of a colloquial term that can be used sort of for everybody, which is sort of what the point of activism is. It's sort of getting people on the same sort of page, whereas a lot of the people that I've been seeing, we all know about the Extinction Rebellion protesters.
Right, yeah.
I would argue that whilst their messages and intentions are on the good side, their methods and their execution are actually doing the reverse of what they'd like to do, which is just damaging the conversation even more, and it's just sort of bringing everyone into the case of, all of these climate change activists, all they do is, you know, they create scenes, they create controversy, they don't actually help the issues, and fair point, Extinction Rebellion have been doing those things. They've not actually been... I don't recall ever hearing any sort of stories of like, things have changed, the world is slightly better now thanks to Extinction Rebellion. All that I've heard is that they've been disrupting public transport, which has been getting the public sort of on the opposite side, just to spite these people that are sort of cluelessly championing the idea that, we shouldn't be using all of these machines, we should go back to nature. It brings a stupidity sort of to the argument, which is the opposite of what we need for it. And I think that maybe Greta Thunberg will sort of be championing a more smarter approach, a more wiser approach. You know, you can say that she's maybe a bit too young for it, but it's like you say, when we were that age, we have sort of a sense of what's going on in the world. We have a basic sense of like morals and ways we want to carry out our beliefs and everything. So really, I see nothing wrong with the way that she's been going about all of these things, and I think it's a step in the right direction.
And like, when you are that age, you have energy, you want to do stuff. You know, I felt the same way. I wanted to do stuff. I did go to protests and try and do stuff. Whether anything changed or not, I don't know. But it is something that young people do, and if it's for the right cause, I don't necessarily mind people fostering and listening to that. But at the same time, this kind of segues into another thing that I wanted to get to. if you do become a public figure, you do become an activist, you've got a message to spread, then you definitely should be open to reasonable criticisms. You definitely should be open to debates. All those are the right things. But at the same time, saying someone has fetal alcohol syndrome, saying lots of hateful things online, that's not the same thing as having a debate or reasonable criticism.
Yeah, exactly. Reasonable criticism is one thing. Degrading the opposition based on their appearance or anything else is just, it doesn't bring anything to the conversation. It's a point that I bring forward a lot because it has truth to it. Surely the entire point of this whole the climate is changing, we need to act now, is to get people on the same page, to get people talking as to how, whether it's true, whether it's not true. Baseless insults are no way to actually progress our conversation.
And Greta's thing does actually go both ways. You know, you also can't shield yourself from criticism because you're a teenager. You don't get special treatment because you're a teenager. That actually shuts down debate. And I think perhaps to some degree the climate change activists are probably aware of that. And if there is any sort of using people for agendas or whatever, maybe there is a bit of hiding behind the fact that she's a child to shield criticism. So that there is sort of grey areas to this. And you get the people saying, "Oh, you're just pushing a child out there. This is kind of creepy. You've got her pictures on posters, and this idea that you can't question her because she's a child." We need a more reasonable middle ground where, yeah, okay, you can question a child because she's put herself out there, but it's just got to be in reasonable terms.
Yeah, exactly. You can question her based on what she's saying and her beliefs. You shouldn't really question her based on how old she is. If we were to do that, we'd be questioning half of the politicians out there because they are over a certain age wherein they don't really have a grasp on what it is they're talking about in the first place. It definitely goes both ways. The point is that you progress conversation instead of shutting it down, be it as a defense or an attack mechanism.
And I think the sad thing in all of this is the sort of mainstream media industry, because of the way that it's going and the fact that there's not really much money in journalism, everybody, regardless of whether you're being self-righteous about certain stories or you're doing stories about Carolyn Flack and causing her to kill herself, it is still pretty much all about hits. And the idea of a child climate change activist and all the controversy that goes around that is what makes the headlines and is what people are talking about. Actually, it's what we're talking about. What we really need is a climate scientist to also be doing the rounds and getting the headlines and things like that. Or and maybe some high-profile skeptic scientists doing the rounds and having debates and things. But it never really works out that way because a lot of science is boring, and that doesn't get the same play as the controversy surrounding Greta. So it's hard to really get down to those debates that people actually would need to hear.
Well, exactly. There is a certain level of gatekeeping that occurs only because, as you say, science is kind of a higher level thinking level than most people can sort of get used to or get accustomed to. It's all well and good saying that you can learn about these things, but if you have a different mental capacity than some other people, it can be quite difficult to sort of read up on these topics and feel like you are in a position where your contribution to the discussion will actually mean something.
And I do have sympathy for the people that, because maybe they don't have much education, and you see this talking head on the news, and because the news is so soundbitey, you don't really get to the depth of the information that you really need. What they see is this elitist scientist telling you this is how it is, and people's natural instincts in some cases is, well, I'm not just going to believe what I'm told by this scientist. How the hell do I know? Maybe he's just all a hoax. Maybe he's lying to me. I have some sympathy for that. There is a disconnect that the media and the public aren't it's not it's clearly not working. Brexit, Trump, a lot of things going on in the world right now comes from this sort of deterioration of trust between the average working class Joe and the media.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I couldn't have put it better myself, honestly. There's a lot of marginalization between sort of different groups of people, and it doesn't really help anyone. They just feel like they're an outcast. They feel like they've been ignored, or maybe just said, "Oh, what you're saying is dumb." They just think it's a lot like the flat Earth sort of conspiracy theorists out there. They sort of have been marginalized and mocked by the scientific community at large, so they felt the need to sort of come together as a community based around this one idea, and whether it's harmful or not, they don't see any sort of wrong in how they think or how they approach matters. And you can sort of apply that to maybe the people that oppose the climate change activists. They may not necessarily be able to read all of the information and take in everything they need to know to fully understand the consequences of climate change. But what they do know is that they don't appreciate being told that this is how things are, and you are wrong if you think another way.
Yeah, there's a lot of elitism, I think, in journalism. There's a lot of talking down and marginalizing people that really you should, and even this sounds elitist, but really you should be sympathizing with them. You know, why did a huge chunk of people vote for Brexit? Is because they feel it's a fu to the wider establishment, the suits in London, the people writing the big stories, the politicians. It's a I still exist. Listen to me. We still have things to say. You're not catering to us, and I do have a bit of sympathy for that. But this kind of brings us on to another topic. I sent you the link before the show. The Bristol Post decided that they would sort of track down tweets and different posts from which essentially amounted to a group of middle-aged men who were essentially trolling Greta Thunberg, and they put their photos out there in the newspaper, or at least on the Bristol Post live website, naming and shaming them and saying, look at the horrible men bullying Greta. I don't quite know how to feel about this. There's a few of them here. I have a policy here on Meme Checker. No matter what memes I cover or debunk or whatever, I'm against sort of doxing and personal attacks. I'd rather deal with the meme and things in generalities than going after individual people. So you'll never find me sort of naming. I'll probably give a screen name or something, but I'm not going to be naming actual people and going after them and stuff like that.
Well, no, there is obviously the thing that, you know, what people say, there is a sort of privacy to that, and that you can feel sympathy for these people and that they're being named and shamed. However, I take a sort of an alternative stance on this. The way that these people, these men that have been identified, the way they were spreading these opinions, it wasn't necessarily like in a pub with their mates or anything. It was on Facebook, which is the most widely used social media site like this side of the world. And they have their real names, they have real photos of themselves up there, and depending on their privacy settings, which isn't specified in the article at all, what their privacy settings are, it can mean that anyone around the world is free to see their face, their name, and what they say. So in a way, it's not really digging deep. It's not going into like the deep web to try and find information about where they live or anything like that. It's just presenting as it is what their face looks like, what their name is, and what they've been saying. If they weren't prepared to deal with those consequences, then it's like you say, use an alternative name. Don't use your real face in Facebook photos. There's a reason why I have toned down my use of Facebook. I barely use any of the features anymore. I have my name and I have my photo, granted, but I've made sure my privacy settings are of a high enough level wherein if people wanted to look into what I was saying, and I'm not saying much, because I literally post maybe a status every couple of months or so. I rarely comment on anything. There's a reason why I dialed it back. It's because what you put out there for the world to see, it will remain there forever. We all know how the internet can be. They will keep screenshots, they will keep comments that you save, and they will put them out of context. They will doctor things to make it seem like that you've said it by giving the most generic Photoshop jobs to anything. And it's a whole thing wherein I don't believe that they've been wronged in any way, because they've put themselves into this situation in the first place by proudly displaying their names, displaying their faces, and displaying their thoughts and feelings. And it's not like we're going to go and find them or dox them or anything like that. We're not going to call the police to their house or anything. We just know who they are and what they look like. It's not information that's been hidden away or anything. It's been presented as it is. I don't necessarily see any reason to feel sympathy for these people, but I will say that if it is hidden behind a certain wall of privacy, that you shouldn't go out and seek these bits of information to put onto the wider internet and be like, oh, look at this foolish person, look at what they're saying, isn't it stupid? You shouldn't be doing that in the first place as a concept. But with this particular instance, I feel like it's being blown a bit out of proportion.
I feel like it's something that could go two ways, really. It could be the first time any of these men have ever actually been called out on their actions, and they could go, oh yeah, shit. I probably shouldn't have said that. Fuck it, I won't do it again. Or it could make them double down and become more aggressive and go into themselves and into their online echo chambers and become this sort of... I don't know how to describe it. There's all sorts of words, and people get annoyed when you start adding labels to things that aren't accurate. But there is a growing group of sort of middle-aged white men that are now playing sort of the victim card. And if that was any of these men, then I think they've probably... It might further radicalize them, if that makes sense. So I've seen some people, I think I actually did find one of the posters on here who just laughed about the fact that he was named and shamed and didn't give a monkey, so there's that too. But some of the comments, like, they're not all of the same ilk. Like, one guy here, I won't name him, but one guy here said, can someone grab her pigtails and Miss Trunchbull her over the fence?
Right.
To me, that does fall into the realm of comedy. I could hear a comedian say that, and I don't necessarily think that's a terrible thing to say.
Well, no, exactly. And then you have to think about what their perspective is with them saying these things. Every person has their own sort of perceptions and ideals of what they think are funny and what they think is acceptable to say. They don't necessarily prepare themselves for the rebuttals and the responses of what they say, because to them, they might just be having harmless fun. They might genuinely want to blast all of these children with a water cannon. You can't tell. It's sort of it's the reason why I don't put any stock in Facebook or Twitter, like forum posts or exchanges or anything, because when you're on a computer, you feel like you can say anything. If you were actually in a position where you were going to do these things that you say you're going to do, like get the water cannon, or assault someone, or do anything like that, people will often back down and be like, no, I can't physically do this. But it's when they're spitting out hateful things like, crush the bitch, sounds good to me, sends her home, that's another thing entirely, where they're just being vitriolic, because I can't even imagine why they would do that. What is the point?
There's various degrees of hatred in these posts. And another one that I wanted to bring up that I thought was quite interesting was somebody posted milkshakes at the ready. Now, to me, that's actually quite an interesting tweet or Facebook post that this person made, because the whole milkshaking thing from a few months back that was taking place, that was the left throwing milkshakes and getting a bit violent against people like Nigel Farage and people on the right, and that was started by the left. So now we're getting into the realm of partisan politics, and it's like, well, is this guy wrong? Is he just advocating the same thing that a portion of the left were doing? And now you're getting into this whole left and right thing.
Exactly.
So,
I've said it before, I've seen myself on the left. I don't advocate for milkshakes, like being thrown on people, because that can be classed as an assault. Regardless of what your political viewpoints are, you shouldn't be smashing eggs on people, you shouldn't be throwing milkshakes at people, because it's nothing better than a food fight in a school hall. We're better than that as people, and we should see that in our approaches. We should be using words to try and get our message across, and if that doesn't work, you shouldn't be using like physical tactics to try and accomplish something. Like, haha, he got covered in milkshake. Now what? That hasn't changed anything about what they believe or how they see things. If anything, it's made it worse, and they're going to double down on things. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, that was always my thing at the time. I was always like, no, don't throw the milkshakes. Yeah, it's funny to see Nigel Farage covered in milkshake, but Nigel Farage was then well within his right to turn around and punch that guy in the face. So then if he's punching people in the face, then other people are punching each other in the face, and then you're getting to a place in society where we don't need to be. And we shouldn't, if you're on the left and you want to tackle the rise of the right, you shouldn't be doing things that make the right look like the reasonable, sensible people in the situation. You know?
Exactly.
You want to be bringing them down through ideas and pointing out why they're wrong and why their ideas are so absurd and why it would never work.
Exactly.
If you start causing violence and looking like idiots, then really you're just driving people that are on the fence into their arms. So I just think a little bit more before getting involved in these kinds of things.
Exactly. A lot of the reactionary things that happen to these people, these speeches, these figures on either the left or the right, it's all very reactionary. There's no initial thought, there's no planning out. No one has a filter anymore. They just feel like they can do these things because they themselves see it as the right thing to do, when in fact it doesn't progress anything.
Yeah. Well, I think we're coming to the end, really, of this discussion. This probably isn't a typical type of podcast that we'd have, because the whole meme itself was not particularly, how do I say it? It wasn't really a factual statement that I was debunking. This was more of a jumping off point for a lot of different things, but I think it made for a good discussion.
Exactly. We've discussed a wide range of ideas, and hopefully it's got people at home thinking too, and won't lead them to dox us or otherwise throw milkshakes at us or anything like that.
Yeah, so I hope everyone enjoyed it. You can find different memes that we're debunking at memechecker.net. I've also just recently set up the Twitter account at memecheckernet. There's also a YouTube channel where this show will be put online. I'll also put it on my other channels and social media accounts on Wide Shut to help give it a bit of a boost. If you guys listening have come across any memes that you would like us to discuss, or you would like me to explore on the website, please send them to us. I would love to get some engagement going with the audience. But for episode 1, I think that's it. So thanks for listening, and thanks, Sam, for co-hosting for this episode.
Not a problem. Happy to do it. Memechecker.net, everybody.